Hola, ¿qué tal? Les habla Ralph Perales. Quiero invitarlos a que me acompañen en este programa. La Constitución americana también provee protección. Hello, I'm Ralph Perales. Welcome to Leyes Cotidianas, or Everyday Law, where we talk about the laws that affect you every day. Today we're going to be discussing the new immigration law recently enacted by the state of Georgia. And we're going to be doing that in a two-part program. And I have the pleasure of having Mario Delgado, an economist, who's been in the show with us before. Welcome, Mario.
Thank you very much. Pleasure being here.
And Charles Kuck, who is an immigration lawyer with Kuck Immigration and also an adjunct law professor at the University of Georgia School of Law. Not only that, but also the former president of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. A lot of titles there, Charles.
There is. It's great to be back with you.
Well, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Let's jump right in and talk about this new immigration law enacted in the state of Georgia. And HB87 was, House Bill 87
That's
was
right.
the one that modified, ended up being enacted here by the Georgia General Assembly. Charles, tell us, let's start just going through this law and find out what it does and what it does not do.
Okay. The law principally affects four different types of people or groups. The first part is it affects state government because it creates a whole new enforcement regime against state government employees if they are proven or even alleged to have not complied with state laws that apply to immigration. Specifically those that require that the SAVE database, which is an immigration database, be checked before any public benefits are given. It requires that every county and locality, municipality be enrolled in E-Verify, and also requires that there be no sanctuary policies in Georgia.
But let me stop you right there and talk about some of those three things that you just mentioned. First of all, it has always been against the law for any undocumented alien to receive any kind of public benefits, not only under federal law, but under Georgia law.
Well, certainly since 1996.
At least since
yeah.
that, yeah. So what does this new law do?
Nothing. It does nothing other than give the ability for people who believe that state employees are not obeying this law, that state employees are giving public benefits to people who are undocumented, that state employees aren't using E-Verify, that there are sanctuary policies out there, the right to complain. In fact, this bill creates a whole new board, the Immigration Enforcement Review Board, staffed by private citizens, appointed by the governor, lieutenant governor, and speaker of the House, that have authority to subpoena and even punish and even take away a city's charter.
But with regard to the sanctuary, to my knowledge, no city or jurisdiction in the state of Georgia has ever even, mentioned the possibility of sanctuary. So
you're right.
So what is the concern there?
The concern is not real. That's one of the many problems with this bill, is it addresses an issue that isn't an issue. It's not a problem. The other example is E-Verify. Every county in Georgia is enrolled in E-Verify. So why is there a punishment mechanism set up to punish something that doesn't exist?
Is it because the counties are just not, using E-Verify?
But they are using it. There's not a single iota of evidence that E-Verify is not being used, that there are sanctuary policies, or that the SAVE database is not used for public benefit issues.
And Mario, I know you want to jump in a second, but let me just wrap up this thought. So basically, this aspect of this legislation doesn't accomplish anything new. Is more of a feel-good, perhaps, provision because it's addressing a problem that doesn't exist?
Well, I tell you what it does do is it increases the burden on city, county, and local governments because there's compliance reports that are now due that weren't due before.
Oh, okay.
So the cost of government has just gone up with no benefit that's going to save money for anybody.
So now, it's basically more of a compliance. This aspect of this legislation is more of a compliance on the counties to do paperwork and show us how to do all these things. Yes,
again, it's going against the expression, again, lowering the budget deficit. Let me add that tack. It's increasing another layer or necessary layer or bureaucratic cost. I leave it
Well,
there.
it's spoken like a true economist.
Well,
you're looking at,
it's just,
at the cost.
they speak on one side of the mouth and the other one, so necessarily they add
and
to
that's
it.
an interesting angle you're bringing up. So in a time of deficit now, you're saying that this law is basically burdening.
Adds to the cost of operating government.
Okay.
It's an addition to the deficit that they talk so loudly about they wanted to reduce.
But the argument against that, Mario, would be that, okay, so we're increasing a little bit on the cost of filing some paperwork, but we are reducing the burden that undocumented aliens, present to us, the taxpayers, with all the services that we're providing them.
What burden? What are they talking about? It's no burden. First, everything have costs. So that by itself doesn't mean anything. Give me about either net benefits or net losses. So the immigrants, up to now, nobody has been able to show at the national or the local level that if you include the revenue component, if you include the productivity component of the immigrants, is adding any type of loss. On the contrary. So from that standpoint, it's just stabbing ourselves.
Why is that, Mario? Why hasn't there been a study? Is it just not feasible? Because we've been, wrestling with this question now, going on for the better part of 10 years, and apparently nobody can come up with a study. Well, I mean, there have been some studies of cost. Yeah. But why hasn't the government or somebody done a study? As an economist, it's just not.
Well, recently,
difficult to
I
capture?
haven't read of anyone just recently, but as of 1900s, end of the 1900s, there have been studies talking of both sides, the revenue and the cost side.
Well, and in fact, there has been a study in Georgia as of 2 years ago that said immigrants, whether documented or undocumented, are a net benefit, a multi-billion-dollar net benefit to Georgia.
Who did that study?
The Immigration Policy Center out of Washington, D.C. All you hear about is the $2.5 billion in costs for undocumented immigration. What you fail to hear about is their $11.2 billion productivity input into the economy, including more than $1 billion in state and local taxes. Here's the problem with this part of this bill. It contains no basis for it to be enacted. At the public hearings on this bill, the representatives didn't present a single study, a single statement, a single scintilla of evidence that there is even one person who is undocumented in Georgia using public benefits that shouldn't. It just doesn't exist. It's the boogeyman. Fighting the boogeyman, and the boogeyman's a bad person, so we have to pass this bill. So now we've just increased the cost to us as taxpayers of Georgia to enforce something that simply did not need enforcement previously.
Okay. Well, let's move on. This is one
that's
section,
item one, right?
item one, and let's move on to the next.
Right, the next group of people that are affected by this bill are employers in Georgia. It was a big deal with Representative Matt Ramsey, who kept saying that E-Verify, employer use of E-Verify, was vitally important to Georgia to stop illegal immigration. He just kept focusing on that. In fact, at one point, as part of this bill, E-Verify was taken out by the Senate, and then a different version of it was put back in by Matt Ramsey and his colleagues in the House, and ultimately ended up being passed here in the state legislature last week. Here's what the new requirement is for employers in Georgia. If you have more than 500 employees, you are required to be enrolled in E-Verify by January 1 of 2012.
The end of this year.
End of this year. Now, this is 500 full-time employees. If you have 100 or more full-time employees, you're required to be enrolled by July 1, 2012. And then finally, the last group of employers in Georgia, those that have more than 10 employees full-time, must be enrolled in E-Verify by January 1, 2013. Well, this is a loophole you can fly a 747 through. Full-time employees? And that's not the only loophole. How do you judge how many employees you have? When do you have to do this? Well, Georgia has tied the use of E-Verify to the ability of a business to get an occupational tax certificate, or what you might call a business license here in Georgia. So when you go to get your business license, you have to sign an affidavit now that says, I have X number of employees and I'm either enrolled or not enrolled in E-Verify. But what date do you use to count your employees? You use January 1 of the year you're applying for your business license. Well, what does to stop a small employer, for example? I terminate all my employees on December 23rd, and then we're off for the week, we're closed. Then I rehire people on January 2nd when we open back up. All of a sudden, they have no employees.
Well, there's always ways to get around all these laws.
But let me just finish that one thought on that. It's 10 employees. That means it only applies to about 30% of Georgia employers. So here you had representatives claiming we've got to have E-Verify, we've got to have E-Verify, when the reality is their E-Verify requirement is only going to apply to about 30% of Georgia employers, many of whom, particularly the largest ones, already enrolled in E-Verify.
Is that because, if I hear you say, that 70% of the employers employ less than 10
That's right.
people?
That's right.
Okay. Go ahead.
Now imagine what's going to do to the agility, the mobility of businesses when they have to go through all those hoops for nothing. Capital is mobile. Entrepreneurship is mobile. Are new businesses going to open up in an environment that is so convoluted as this law is making it when they have the opportunity to move to another state?
Well, and not only that, but as we saw with Arizona, there was a lot of boycotts and whatnot, that they lost about 150 million so far, I believe, since then. So yeah, that brings another set of problems. Now, Chuck, getting back to this E-Verified, I mean, everybody, folks complain E-Verified is so expensive. I mean, how does the program work?
Well, it's actually a relatively straightforward program, and I actually advise my employer clients to enroll in E-Verify if they've got issues with their employees that they feel they may be undocumented. Basically, it's a federal government database, a combination of information from Social Security and the Immigration Service that allows an employer, when they have a name and a birth date and a Social Security number, to verify whether that person with that name and number is authorized to work.
But you have to be accepted into that program, am I correct?
Right, you have to apply
you have to sign a memorandum of understanding.
Yeah, you sign a 16-page memorandum of understanding which waives your Fourth Amendment rights to search and seizure, allows ICE to come in and audit you whenever they want to without giving you a warrant for your documents. But at the same time, there is a problem with the database and the errors in it that I want to talk about.
Yeah, and I want to pick on that point in just a second. We got to take a quick break. We will continue the discussion in about 60 seconds.
Desde el momento en que ellos llegan a nuestras vidas, dan su primer paso, aprenden a andar en bicicleta. Hasta la preparación de su primer día del 5º grado es un reto para todos los padres criar un hijo saludable. Permítanos guiarle a través de un embarazo seguro y feliz. Aprenda sobre salud, nutrición e información educativa relacionada con el desarrollo de su hijo. Padres e Hijos Atlanta, una publicación del mundo hispánico. Recoja su copia gratis hoy. ¿Cuál es su tesoro más preciado?
We're discussing the Illegal Immigration Reform and Enforcement Act recently enacted by the Georgia General Assembly with Mario Delgado, economist, and Charles Kuck, an attorney practicing in immigration. And Charles, before the break, we were discussing the E-Verified, and apparently it's a very simple program where you just access it through the web on a database.
That's right.
The government, after you agree, of course, to comply with whatever regulations, a memorandum of understanding that you got to sign. But my understanding is that when you do that, you just type in the name, the Social Security number, and the date of birth of a hire.
Right. Well, you also put in the information you would typically collect on an I-9 form. So basically, you fill your I-9 form out, your employment verification form, and basically put that into E-Verify. And then it comes back instantaneously with a message saying, person's good to go or they're not.
But that is supposed to happen after you offer the job to somebody, not before.
Oh, they're already on the payroll. You have hired them. You cannot pre-screen people. You cannot use E-Verify to not hire somebody.
There was a problem a few years back when the government was toying with these databases, and I think there were 3 databases that were using. It used to be known the Basic Pilot Program,
Right. It was a nightmare.
Something else. And what they found back then was that a lot of employers were using the system to pre-screen applicants before they offered the job, and they were engaging in discriminatory practices, which is obviously, against the law. Have there been any studies recently on whether that continues with this E-Verify?
It remains a major concern of ICE because they are constantly doing training on E-Verify, and that is always one of the major focuses, that you cannot use E-Verify prior to hiring.
Okay. Now, here's the thing that I noticed when I was asking you, what do you put in there? If I put in your information here in Georgia, and Charles is working in California, the system won't know that.
Well, it will if my employer in California has verified me. In fact, it's a major issue. If I have 2 jobs in Georgia, let's say I work at McDonald's and I work at Arby's and they both use E-Verify.
Okay.
When I go into Arby's for my second job to work the night shift, the system will come back and say, this ID is being used at a different job. It's a tentative non-confirmation. Please come to Social Security and check it out. Okay. So I actually have to get permission from the government to get my second job if I want to. Okay. The bigger problem is that of identity theft within this system. There are pictures of people in this database. Anybody who's an immigrant or has ever been an immigrant has their picture in this database, so you can use a photo verification tool. Anybody who has ever gotten a U.S. passport has their picture in this database. But for everybody else, and everybody else is about 100 million people, there are no pictures. So, for example, we had a client call yesterday that was concerned because they had somebody come in who they had previously fired because they found out his documents were fake. And he came back and said, you can run me through E-Verify now, this ID works. So there's a sale out there apparently to purchase E-Verifiable documents. Clearly, using E-Verify is not the be-all, end-all to solve illegal immigration in Georgia. In fact, you have to understand that you cannot use E-Verify for current employees. So even if I enroll today under this new law, I can't go back and check the people that work for me. I can only do it for new hires.
Another criticism on the database was the accuracy, and I'm sure that has improved over the last 10 years, but there's still a concern about that.
Right.
And it could be something as simple as, you know, you don't use your middle initial, or your name was misspelled. You have a maiden name, you change
your name for marriage. There's about a 2% error rate for things like that.
So yes, Mario.
No, just notice, this is verbally, we're talking. And look how long it's taking to explain that. Imagine in actual implementation, what does that do to a business? How it increases costs and delays operations. So let's translate all this that sounds fast and
that's where I want to get to, because, you know, let's say that the system kicks back, you know, my name because I was using my maiden name, my Social Security is under my maiden name, and I just got married and I didn't change it, etc. I changed my driver's license, but not my Social Security card. So what is a person to do? I mean, what is the remedy?
You have to go to Social Security, and we've all loved standing in line at Social Security, and come back with basically like a letter from your mother saying you were sick, a letter from Social Security saying we've corrected this issue in the system, and you run that through E-Verify again, so now you're back in E-Verify at the employer level to get a confirmation that somebody's eligible.
And does the law provide with some kind of protection for that employee? Because now I got a job, E-Verify is not going to clear me, so do I have 30 days?
You have 8 days.
8 days.
8 days from the day the employer gives you the documents to get them corrected. And during that time, you remain on payroll. You can work. It's not evidence that you're undocumented or can't work. After those 8 days, if you don't get it done, then the employer can choose to terminate you, and many of course, would do.
Let me throw another economic angle on it. We're competing nowadays globally. We're not competing locally. We had a monopoly, economically, a global monopoly after World War II, when the economies of the competing countries were destroyed. For about 30 years, we were king of the road. The world could wait because we were the sole provider of anything. That's been gone since the late 70s, early 80s, and increasing. The rate of acceleration is increasing. How do we think that we can afford remaining competitive if we begin acting in such a logical, irrational way, just for political
but let me play the devil's advocate, and I don't know if maybe Chuck may have the answer to this, but other countries do it. I mean, other countries have, you know, very stringent laws on who can live or work or do things there. So
because we want to be just like Saudi Arabia. That's my goal, is to have an economy and a social structure like Saudi Arabia, which does exactly that.
Well, and the interesting point, which I think what you're alluding to, is that in this country we have something called the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah, that's not a constitution thing.
But again, look at their economists, and let me follow up on what Chuck said. Look at the conditions of their economy. You know, it's nothing to be proud of and trying to aim to be like. On the contrary. And also look at the type of central direction that they provide to their economy, much more than we do. We let a lot of the market, the free market, free forces determine the speed of things. They, in certain ways, can maybe tighten up in one end while direct and speed up other aspects of the economy. So they have more flexibility in how they're going to adjust for the destruction or the obstacles that they place in some components of the economy. We don't. We have to go along with the market forces that are, in many cases, very fragile and very fast. So we cannot afford to what they are doing. But again, going back to what Chuck said, are we going to try to emulate and become like their economy?
Mm-hmm. Well, and here's the other thing that our legislature decided to ignore. The ability of a state to require private employers to enroll in a federal voluntary database is currently before the Supreme Court. We don't even know this is legal yet. Now, we'll probably know by June 1 or so when the court ends its session whether it's legal or not. Maybe it will be, but maybe it won't be. So at this point, we don't even know if this is going to be effective here in Georgia. But the bottom line is we know it's going to cost money to enroll. At one of the hearings, Matt Ramsey said, it only took me 14 minutes to enroll and e-verify. Well, first of all, you didn't read the 16-page Memorandum of Understanding. Second, you couldn't have gone through the training that fast. Third, it takes time for employers to get up to speed, particularly employers that hire lots of people to get up to speed. But I view the biggest problem with this e-verify requirement is that it leaves out 70% of the employers in Georgia. Mm-hmm. It leaves them to hire whoever they want to, whenever they want to. Think about this. Who do you think is more likely to hire somebody who's undocumented?
Well, you know, one thing that bothers me about this whole issue is that we're blurring the lines of the jurisdictions between the federal government and the state government. Here you have a state, like you say, that is forcing Georgia employers to go into a federal program. Mm-hmm. And of course, you know, we're going to be talking about some of the other components of the law where we're basically, providing state police officers, state jurisdiction with the power to enforce federal immigration laws. So I think there's something there that just bothers me, tremendously.
It's like like a little tiny rock in your shoe. You just can't get rid of it. It just keeps bothering you.
Yeah. Well, let's move on because you mentioned employers. What's the next one?
The government, the employers. Next one are the police. The police are featured prominently, or what they call peace officers are featured prominently here in this bill. The police have now been given a new authority, and that is to obtain and question people about their immigration status.
Is this the Arizona law that everybody talks about?
It is the Arizona law. Frankly, I think it's the Arizona law on steroids. What the sponsors tried to say was, we wrote it so it's not like the Arizona law. What they have failed to recognize that it wasn't the language of the Arizona law that was the problem. It was the effect of the Arizona law, made clear by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals when they ruled that this particular provision was unconstitutional. Basically, what they're saying here is if you are stopped while committing a criminal offense, now that sounds really bad. Oh, a criminal offense, yes, we should check all the criminals. But in Georgia, a moving violation is a criminal
traffic offense.
Traffic offense. So you don't put your blinker on when you turn or you move into a different lane. So you're stopped for that. During that stop, the police officer can say, please show me your identification. And if you don't produce one of a certain list of documents that's listed in this bill, then the police officer can question your immigration status. Now, what's interesting about this is one of the documents that it will refuse to accept is a driver's license from a state that does not check immigration status, currently Washington State and New Mexico. So if I have a New Mexico license or a Washington license, the officer then can ignore the full faith and credit clause of the Constitution and say, I'm going to arrest you, I'm going to bring you to the police station, and there we're going to check your immigration status. So you have to ask, if I am driving up Georgia, I'm 85 one day, and I forgot my wallet at home, and heaven forbid I get caught speeding, and I say to the officer, I don't have any ID, I don't even have a Costco card, I've got nothing. Do you think he's going to take me to the police station? Mm-hmm. And the answer to that question is absolutely not. They're going to take Mario to the police station under that circumstance? Mm-hmm. I guarantee you they're going to do that. Mm-hmm. You can say all you want that racial profiling is not allowed in this bill. It says nothing about how well you speak English or how you dress or the clothes you wear. In fact, I was speaking to a legislator early on in this session when I asked them, well, how do you think the police are going to be able to tell if you say you can't use racial profiling? And they said, well, by the clothes they wear.
By the clothes they wear. Well, that's true. All righty. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time for this segment of the program. We're going to be coming back next Sunday and continue with the second half of this program, explaining and going over the Georgia Illegal Immigration Reform and Enforcement Act. We'll see you next Sunday at 10 o'clock. Join us then. Until then, you all behave or you're going to need a lawyer.
Leyes Cotidianas les llega a ustedes gracias al generoso apoyo financiero de la Fundación de Justicia Civil del Estado de Georgia. Mundo Hispánico, el vocero de la comunidad hispana desde 1979.